Thank you so much, Yvonne, for making this happen, for this invitation. This invitation as occasion to have this, for me at least, long-awaited conversation. I know everyone sitting in here is like, this is a long-awaited conversation with Prof. Ruthie. And I am also of that hope. So I'm blessed to have the opportunity to sit here, but I know I'm sitting here for all of us. I wonder if we can start with, it's basic, but I often think sometimes what happens in our time is that we're all operating with terms and words and think we're operating from a shared space, but actually we're not always. So I wanted to start us off with a basic question of, what is abolition?
Thank you so much, Prof. Victoria. Thank you, Comrade Yvonne, for that beautiful introduction, the warm welcome that you and comrades here at the Forge have given to all of us. Thank you, comrades Abishali, with whom I have been in conversation now for days. It's good to see you again. Thank you, other comrades who have come out this evening. It's very nice to be here. What is abolition? Abolition requires that we change one thing, everything. There are many ways that I characterize abolition, and the different ways rest differently in different ears, and that's appropriate. Sometimes I say abolition is emancipation in rehearsal. Sometimes I say abolition is small c communism. Sometimes I say abolition starts from the very homely premise that freedom is a place. These various ways of thinking abolition come together in such a way that we can already begin to understand that abolition, to be, must be green, real green, environmentally sustaining of the planet, not of green capitalism. To be green, it must be red, making it possible for working people and their families to control the land and the other forces of production that make us able to make our lives day to day, week to week, and generationally to generation to generation. And to be green and red, abolition must also be international. Because if we do not free the land and the water that makes us alive, we will not have achieved abolition, but we still do it, bit by bit, wherever we are doing what we do.
Sure. So, the two questions that I want to come to, and one is you know, I want to come back to the language part of me wants to come back to emancipation and rehearsal, but I'll suspend that because I realize maybe that's my particular interest. So I'll come back to it and go to the question of land and resources in relation to, and highlight land in relation to abolition as a movement. That shows up, of course, as you know, in particular ways everywhere, but in its own ways here. And I just wonder if you can talk about that, the question of land in relation to abolition.
The question of land in relation to abolition is such an excellent question. Thank you, Prof. Victoria, for asking it. Now, my comrades here from Abishali know firsthand how the effort to free the land through occupying it for homes and communities runs up against the forces of organized violence in the form of public and private police and also gangsters who chase people from the land, who hurt people, who kill people. This then gives us a more general way to think about land as something that should belong to all of us, as against thinking of land as private property that only belongs to some of us. Thinking about that, private property and things that only belong to some of us, brings us to capitalism, which is a system of production that depends on private property in land and other resources that only belong to a few, but are made valuable by the joined energy of the many, of the workers in the field, of the workers in the factory, of the people in the household who raise and care for and nurture the children and adults who become the workers in the fields and the factories, and those who are not workless, who are still participating in this system as the objects of control, which enables value to circulate into the hands of capitalists, and otherwise vulnerable, which is to say, ways that bring death early to people of all ages.
This is, so when we were speaking earlier and just thinking about this relationship between land, or land understood as different from private property, right? And the extent to which the space that we are in, I'm not speaking specifically now about the space of the floor, but the city, the construct of South Africa, and the global construct of the nation states, right? That these are predicated upon, as you've said, a definition of, or a translation of land, a turning of land, making it into property, right? Private property. when we think about this from here, there's a way in which and I don't know if I'm seeing anything that is novel here, but there's a way in which that what democracy brings here, and perhaps in we can analogize many other places, what independence writ as democracy brings. When many are on some level, whether it's grappling towards emancipation or grappling towards liberation as the organizing term, or independence, somewhere that sort of shared, blurred dream of what what the movement is about for isn't necessarily for a private property, a deed. This is how you have this house, you have that property. But somehow what 20th century movements have produced in terms of independence or decolonization in a formal sense, or a political sense, state-wise, because political doesn't quite work there either, is to produce democracies that do not decolonize the land, right? And I wonder what we do with that. That's the question that is perpetually deferred.
That's a great question. And I have a kind of long answer. Bear with me. And you know, comrade, I keep looking to the audience because the audience is here and I'm not ignoring you, you know, when I look away from you. Okay. So let me start with something that might be of interest to the people gathered here today. And that is, why did this contemporary abolition movement even call itself abolition when there were, you know, other words available? Freedom, emancipation, liberation, independence. And one of the answers to that question is that for many people, especially in the Western Hemisphere, North and South, the end of slavery and colonialism were never achieved fully in a capitalist, liberal framework of individual equality before the law and of opportunity. And that was not possible because the liberal framework arose from a system of racial capitalism that required inequality for the production of value, whether it came from the land or the hand. So the contemporary abolition movement sought to remind people that abolition had not yet been fully achieved. But what did that even mean? Well, one of the people we look to is the great W.E.B. Du Bois, born in Great Barrington, Massachusetts, United States of America, deceased in Accra, Ghana. The first known communist ever to have been featured on a United States of America postage stamp for the mail. Strange things happen. In 1935, so 90 years ago, about, Du Bois wrote a great work called Black Reconstruction in America. Black Reconstruction in America. And in that work, Du Bois, in many, many pages, it's a big book, examined what happened to Black people and Black communities in the former slave states of the United States South during the first 5 years after the end of the U.S. Civil War that formally, on paper, ended slavery. And in those 5 years, 6 years, 7 years, what Du Bois saw by reading very closely what he could read was that people in communities built amazing community institutions. They developed local states, they developed public education, they developed systems of agriculture, they developed all kinds of things. And the great scholar and poet and librettist Thulani Davis also shows that the circulation of culture in that region was also not only very deep, but it was one of the things that held the pieces together. Huh? Du Bois goes on to explain how the counter-revolution of property, capitalism, destroyed this world. Now, Du Bois asks us to think that there were two different kinds of democracy struggling to arise in that time in the United States and beyond. What he called industrial democracy, which is capitalist democracy, and what he called abolition democracy. The democracy the people who had freed themselves were making from the ground up. It's the democracy that Abashali practices today all over South Africa and other social movements here in South Africa and elsewhere in the world, such as the MST in Brazil, practice every day. Abolition democracy, democracy from the ground up, rather than the quote-unquote formal, but not real democracy, the kind that you're pointing toward, Comrade Victoria, when you talked about what the outcome was for so many peoples in so many states that had achieved independence but had not, in many cases, managed to change what we might as well call the political economy from capitalism to socialism, from the economy for the few to an economy for all.
So, you've destroyed my flow of questions in the most beautiful way. So now I feel like I have to take it to Haiti.
Okay.
And because in my head, what I hear you talking about in terms of the capture of projects of emancipation, freedom, abolition by industrial democracy or capitalism, I can't help but go to Haiti today and Haiti with the revolution, and almost every attempt thereafter to wrench individual selves as quote-unquote property and create something, and the ways in which the international order has refused that. I mean, it happens in so many places, including how South Africa's democracy is negotiated. But I feel pulled to that detour to come back.
Sure, I'm happy, well, sad, but more than willing to talk about Haiti. So comrades, does everyone know where I am talking about when I say Haiti? Yeah? Okay, good. Haiti has struggled since Christopher Columbus dropped anchor there in 1492. Haiti has struggled, and yet it's also true from those first days in 1492, just as in the first days in Cape Town when the Dutch dropped anchor in 1650 something. The people there who were not discovered have struggled, yeah? But back to Haiti. If people want later to talk about the Christmas Rebellion, I'd be happy to, because one of my students wrote a brilliant dissertation on it. That was 1521. But anyway, Haiti, since the glorious, the great, the remarkable revolution that culminated in 1804 with all of the people in that territory being free. This is abolition's goal. All of the people are free. All of the people. Haiti has struggled to retain its capacity, its ability to determine its own way of being in the world, because what you called the international order, but very much led by the United States of America, has interrupted and interrupted and interrupted and interrupted the possibility for Haiti as a place where people live, work, play, and pray to determine its own future, to determine its own way. Today, just now, there are military and police from Kenya and elsewhere making their way to Haiti to enforce the organized abandonment the people of Haiti experience over and over and over again, to enforce that with violence, to push people and herd people and sacrifice people until people give in and allow those for whom the capitalist system is the proper system can reassert their control. But there's always organizing from below, always. The international order, again, something Comrade Prof. Victoria referred to, is the international order from above, but even that is not all the world at all. And we can talk now or later about the South Africa bringing a case in support of Palestine and in opposition to the genocide in Palestine to the International Court of Justice. So that is another form of international from above. And whatever our correct criticisms and oppositions are to the South Africa state at all levels, that was a powerfully galvanizing thing for those who had the courage and smarts to do it, to enable and encourage the world to stand up against that other international order with our international order and say, stop. Words are not enough, but they matter. But I also want to just bring up briefly at this point yet another international order. I still like the phrase, the term, the concept, the project, third world, because there is a third international order, at least, of formerly enslaved, currently colonized, and others struggling for emancipation, who are organizing themselves from below, who, like Abashali here, like MST in Brazil, many organizations of indigenous people in many parts of the world. I can name Red Nation, which is indigenous people from all over North America, so Canada, the US, Mexico, and also the Caribbean, who are insistent in the work to free the land, to compel it to be the socially productive resource that enables communities to have homes, have lives, and flourish. It is a move against capitalism because there is no ownership, there is no sale, there is no rent. There is only being there in respectful, coordinated occupation.
You know, so again, two different tracks here. And maybe what I'll do is put them both up. You choose which one you want to take, and we can come back to the other. Because it seems to me that what is so central in in the work you have done, the work you do, and in what you have been giving us this evening is this, you know, the local or national questions and the global. That to effectively organize, to effectively achieve abolition, full freedom, requires the working within the two, across the two, between the two. And one of the things that is striking to me, both in terms of, I started with Haiti and I wanted us to get to Palestine, is that in this moment, and with Haiti, when there was the removal of Jean-Bertrand Aristide, South Africa became the only place that said, come. And in some ways that, in terms of this tension between the top, right? We still don't quite know why Aristide had to go, according to the US. Elected by the Haitian population, South Africa gives him and his family someplace to go. And there's that part of South Africa's very powerful role, post or not post apartheid, but certainly post legal, and I say that in their caveats, but post 94. That might be the better way to put it. Where these are two instances where we can say that South Africa intervenes, and intervenes in a way that is saying, no, not in our names. You're not going to be able to say that this is for human rights and this is just and this is, we have to disrupt that narrative. At the same time, and I'm not saying, I'm pulling out these two examples because they speak so clearly to me to the drive for abolition, for freedom, for undoing the crimes of land dispossession. And South Africa enters into that and makes the case for how that international order is run. At the same time, the land question, which sits at the heart of the crime of apartheid, or very much at the heart, segregation, colonialism, conquest. So the local, the national, gets deferred in certain ways. So I want to invite or to bring in Palestine, but to also hold with that the tension of the reconstruction here deferred.
Perfect. You could probably just leave it. where to put it. But I'm happy to hold forth. Really great thoughts and knotting together these various strands that we have been discussing this evening, and I'm really grateful to you for that. So let's start, we'll go back to Du Bois for a moment to move forward. Du Bois was making the stark distinction between formal and real abolition, or we could say formal and real independence, or formal and real emancipation, or formal and real end of apartheid. Right? The formal and the real are not identical. The formal frequently, if not always, indicates a change in status. So you can think of that many ways. You can tick a different box or something. But real means that there is an entire embodied future set of activities and possibilities available. Right? It's not just a formal thing. Right? Real requires, again, it's abolition, that we change everything. So let's talk a little bit about Palestine and South Africa in this regard. We had a good long discussion about Palestine on Sunday, I think, in the Abishali Political School. And we talked about how the people of Palestine who were subjected to the international order slicing up the territory in which they made their living and made their lives early in the 20th century, not unlike how the international order at the Berlin Conference in the latter part of the 19th century, 1882, if I recall correctly, sliced up this entire continent among themselves, the imperial forces. So that happened to Palestine, this slicing up in by something called the Balfour Declaration. Then in 1948, the same year the apartheid state came into full expression of itself here in South Africa, the state of Israel came into being in what had been Palestine. More lines drawn. And from the entire series of battles that preceded the declaration of the State of Israel until now, the amount of land on which Palestinians, the descendants of those people who had been living in that territory in the early part of the 20th century, could call home or use for their livelihoods and their enjoyment, has shrunken and shrunken and shrunken and shrunken and shrunken. The war on Gaza today targets about 2 million people, their numbers declining every minute because of the murderousness of the Israel occupation force in spite of the hue and cry raised by people all over the world, including many, 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 many Jewish people who say not in our name. So Palestinians in 1948 were pushed from what is now, if you look at a map, the state of Israel, 750,000 people displaced from their homes, and pushed into refugee camps or into refugee status elsewhere or into diaspora. Many people who were pushed out of that area that became Israel were pushed into Gaza, as well as camps on the other side of what's called the West Bank, between the eastern border of Israel and the river, Jordan. And what has been happening persistently since then is round after round after round after round after round of dispossession. So when the ICJ, when the government of South Africa went to the ICJ to say, we charge genocide, they said so with the full understanding that 2 million people who have been pushed and herded and pushed and herded from their homes, 80% of which have been destroyed, into smaller and smaller and smaller regions, which are constantly being bombarded, that South Africa could say, with its head high, we understand these processes. We too have lived this. We understand these things, and it shall not pass again. So, given that this happened in a country where land redistribution has not happened, is, to me, an opportunity for movements here, in particular Abashali, because that's the movement I know the best, but other movements as well, to demand of the governments here that they fulfill what has been deferred and delayed here, no less than stand in solidarity with Palestine. So it's not either or, it's both.
Now I feel like I have to ask this question. So I was listening to a discussion last year where they were discussing a multinational team of lawyers discussing a case where Haiti was trying to get reparations from private actors because of the 1825 indemnification. So basically what that is, just so we're all on the same page, Haiti wanted to have independence. The French government said, but we're going to get all kinds of claims against us for the loss of property for the slave and the landowners in Haiti, so we need indemnification. So Haiti had to pay for their own freedom, right? And they had to take out a massive loan, and that's what crippled part of what crippled the economy. So we see that this oppression that we're living with in this non-freedom is also linked to this question of banks. This non-freedom is linked to the question of banks.
Yes.
I want to say two more other things, and to bring it to the South African thing, and the question of land. In his book, Land Matters, Advocate Tuke Toby talks about how this argument of, if we have land redistribution, it's going to collapse the banks. He completely debunks that, right? But the the property and the value and money is of the capital and the class and the bourgeoisie is held in banks, right? Then we also have, I'm just want to put three scenarios and then come to my question. Then we also have currently the Forex cartel case, the rand manipulation case, where foreign banks have manipulated the rand-dollar pair, made billions of dollars out of that. The Competition Commission in South Africa has, found difficulty being able to prove jurisdiction. I'm like, the harm was caused to us. You will come here and account. For me, that's as simple as that, right? So again, we're looking at, in all three of these instances, banks playing a central role. So I was wondering, if you don't mind, Prof. Ruthie, if you could also just sketch the link between the 1% and the Occupy Wall Street movement and the abolition movement, because it's all connected. Yes, I understand materially and tangibly, and symbolically, this issue of land and labor rights and all the things that we experience on a day-to-day. But there is also the specter of the things that we don't get to engage every day, but it's affecting us, which is the financialization argument. So if you might speak to that thing.
I'd love to. Thank you, comrade. Great question. You always put a good question. I'm really grateful to you for that. So, this question of banks and financialization. Does everybody have an idea of what financialization means? Shake your head no if you don't. I see some no. All right. Financialization means basically this. Let's pretend this is a piece of land. This card is actually a piece of land. It has such an amazing use value, which is to say value that we get from using it. We can live on it, we can garden on it, we can make things on it in our little workshops or big factories, we can play on it, we can pray on it. We can make a little money by having tourists come and admire how beautiful it is and then go home with their trash. These things are all possible. Now, financialization transforms this land into a faucet, a tap for money to come out of. By imposing on the land a deed or a mortgage or another encumbrance means burden, that those who live on the land, work on the land, pray on the land, enjoy the land, invite people to come and note the beauty of the land, must pay for. And the payment means that all of those people, instead of just enjoying the land, have got to figure out how to make enough money so that they can buy the things they need, sometimes also the things they want, but also have surplus left over to give to the bank, right? That's the mortgage or the debt, right? So what has happened over time is that all forms of property, including property in humans, has been financialized so that those who control that property, including property in humans, are compelled to squeeze more value out of that property so they can satisfy the banks. Now, Comrade V.I. Lenin died a century ago, January. Comrade V.I. Lenin, who was a great Russian strategist who, with the Bolshevik Party and the Soviets, the self-organized masses of people who came together in various parts of what was then the Russian Empire, produced the revolution that we know of as the Russian Revolution. Comrade Lenin said in longer, maybe 110 years ago, said, if we look at the international order of imperialism, we see that financialization is controlling all the other forms of capitalism, which then, together, are with the imperial nation states partitioning and repartitioning, which is to say dividing and redividing, the territories of the earth into economic territories, i.e. making this card, which is land, into something from which profit can be pulled. So this question of banks today actually takes us a little further in order to come back. And thank you for bearing with me. This is something I think about a lot. Banks and other international financial institutions are all very busy looking around the planet at places that can be transformed into economic territory for the purpose of pulling out profit the way water comes out of a tap. Huh? And they are doing it in the name of many different kinds of beneficiaries. So while when we think of the banks, we think, you think of men in suits, particularly, but not exclusively white men, not at all anymore, but men in suits, sitting in offices in London or New York or Tokyo, watching the monitors on their screens and getting money. But they're also roving the planet, these international financial institutions, on behalf of workers who agreed to defer their pay today with the expectation that they would get a pension when they're old and retire. I'm 74 years old. I know what I'm talking about. And those workers' pension funds are not controlled by the workers. It's not a bunch of, we get together and say, let's pool our money, and when somebody's old and infirm, we'll give them some money so they won't go hungry or homeless or without joy and beauty. No, they're run like banks, but they're not banks, that rove the planet looking for places to turn land into a tap for profit. So there are land grabs happening all over the place in the name of pension funds, both from the global north, like the Canada Public Service Pension Fund. These are people who do like pretty good work, school teachers, firefighters. But their old age fund looks south. Also, the pension funds here look around, right? Because this is the problem of capitalism. The problem of capitalism is it demands inequality to produce profit, even when the purpose of the profit is to lessen inequality in the form of pensions. And I want to say one more thing. I'm in my pulpit, I guess.
Yes.
You know, I have to tell you a story, and then I'll say the one more thing. I'm going to talk about money. But before I talk about that, I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself. I was born in 1950 in New Haven, Connecticut, which is a small industrial and educational city in North America, in Connecticut. And the two principal products of my city were students, graduates of a very fancy institution, and guns. They made weapons. That's what they made in New Haven. They educated people to decide who to kill, and they made guns so they could go out and kill them, pretty much. And I grew up in a household of people who were involved in the movement against American apartheid, because when I was born, it was still the law of the land. And also they were organizers of labor unions and other things. And I was the grandchild of a woman who had grown up on a farm, a dairy farm, but had been sent to the city as a girl when she was 15 to work for some rich people in their households so she could send money back to the farm so the family wouldn't lose the farm, right? That was the 19th century. So this is the world in which I grew up. And I've always liked learning things, and I've always liked telling people what I learned. And I couldn't imagine a future for myself. But I wanted to be able to tell people things. So what I would do is on Sundays, I would sit in church and imagine being the preacher. That's what I did. I would imagine myself, I had braids. I would imagine myself with my braids in a preacherly robe, pounding the lectern, saying something, but I didn't know what the words were yet. So now, at 74, I know what the words are.
Okay.
And I want to say something about money. We were talking the other day in the Abolition Political School here in Johannesburg about the question, why are there cities? Where did cities come from? And many of my comrades rightly described the way that cities, especially here in South Africa, become economic hubs, which also become centers of inequality. And as one of the comrades from Mountain View, anyone here from Mountain View? Hey. One comrade from Mountain View said, they sprinkle crumbs that we follow to the cities. Now we know those crumbs are money. That's what the crumbs are, because our lives, our livelihoods, our ability to make ourselves anew each day, each week, each year, and each generation depend more and more and more and more on this thing called money. Money, however, is not the same as capitalism, even though capitalism exists to make money more. Both of these things are true. There was money before capitalism. I'm wearing some cowrie shells, pre-capitalist money. I'm wearing some brass on my wrist, pre-capitalist money. Somebody here in this room has some cloth. That was pre-capitalist money. Iron workers would make iron bars that were pre-capitalist money. And then there was also gold and other things. So what money lets us do, which is not a bad thing, is it lets us It lets us store our energy. You know, we work for and get a little money, and we store our energy in a piece of coin or a piece of paper until we encounter someone or something that we would like to exchange that money for. So money itself is not the problem. The problem is inequality. The problem is living in a system whose purpose is not to make our lives fuller and greater, but to make money more. Now, it might be, as Comrade Richard pointed out to me, that some of you discussed here in Johannesburg a few weeks ago, maybe a month ago, that perhaps getting rid of money would be a step toward realizing abolition as emancipation in rehearsal. That might be, but let's not confuse our ability to move around or our ability to stay put with the problems that the centrality of money to the system that oppresses us and sucks us dry produces. So the last thing I'd like to say is that being able to move around and being able to stay put are two fundamental demands for abolition. You should be able to move. You should be able to stay where you are. Either thing. That means borders are a problem. That means xenophobia is a problem, has many problems. That means many things. But we also see how people come together in various kinds of communities that are built with the determination and energy of those who make them and become communities across languages, across ethnicities, across capacities to earn that money. And when we think about cities, then, we're not only thinking about inequality, but we're also thinking about something that is, remember I was talking about how Du Bois said there's industrial democracy and there's abolition democracy? All right. Let's think about specialization. Cities, when I say cities are shaped by specialization, we can all immediately say, yeah, it's a hierarchy, there are those below and those above. But let's think about it through abolition and think how specialization is a way for us to combine our energy and talents. That specialization does not necessarily lead to hierarchy if our understanding of our social relations with each other rejects hierarchy at the outset. You know, I'm a child of people who worked as cleaners, specialization, they were great at it. And you can believe I'm a very good cleaner, although I don't like to do it. What specialization, sometimes we call it the division of labor. What specialization lets us imagine through abolition democracy, or more, to refer to my title, abolition geography, is to think about freedom as a place in which we are radically interdependent. That comrade lawyers at this point in our political development, comrade lawyers, comrade land occupiers, comrade teachers, comrade everybody come together in radical interdependence in order to move what we do forward. And the problem that abolition also reminds us to think about, be aware of, and to organize against by reorganizing our relations with one another, is how the forces of organized violence are always there to interrupt us in the work that we do, to interrupt how we live together, to interrupt the possibility of imagining the future and realizing that imagination, to interrupt how we understand the intense, dense, necessary work of, in a huge way, reproduction. Not only having a baby, but making the future together. What they call social reproduction. And that's what abolition is the political vision for.
Good evening. Thank you so much for your presence and your words and your insights. I will be taking a lot home with me. I just wanted to touch on, sorry, I'm just looking at my notes. You made a distinction between the real and the formal. And I often think about the digital age we live in and how tethered we are to our versions online. And many of us use the online space as a tool for mobilization. But I often find myself spiraling in thoughts about how the many algorithms we exist in, that we perpetuate, release us from the real, which is the 3D, the 4D, because the digital is one-dimensional, but it's integrated itself into our lives in such a way that we feel like it is part of us. So I wonder how abolition can work in a digital space. Is the digitalization tied with the financialization that you spoke about? Is it ripping us? Is it formalizing our suffering more? Yeah, that's my main question.
Great.
Yeah, let's take a bunch of questions.
First of all, thank you very much for talking to us. As she said, it's just very insightful. For me, I guess, and I was a bit late, so you're going to have to forgive me, 50 minutes late, but in this discussion, I find that certain words are being mentioned which are very much so important: labor exchange, production, and whatnot, and that brings us towards more of a class discussion. I want to be looking also at gender. And for me, what does the abolitionist movement say in regards to gender? And what does that, as you said, that state of freedom look like when we are talking about gender? I say this because one of my biggest fears is the constant centralization of class, which I think is fundamentally important, yet at times thinking, as my friends have always said, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, we've got to meet those needs first, and then we can focus on other shit. That stuff is just as important and necessary. And if we do not address the hierarchy that you're talking about in terms of patriarchy, that sort of emancipation and abolition, how does that occur in regards to gender? So for me, I would like more, how are we thinking about gender in this sort of freedom space of an abolitionist movement?
Thank you so much, Prof. My name is Ndombi. I have a question. I've been following your term on abundant geography a lot, and I'm interested to understand in terms of what happened when the abundant geography is home. And you speak in about cities, and it's interesting. In South Africa, we've got the highest rate of car accidents and bus accidents in particular seasons. Next week, we're gonna see a lot of black dead bodies on the streets because the black migrant labor has to go back home and come back again to the city. We see another, thousands of black bodies again in December, because although home is what you guys in the US might term reservation, And here in South Africa, it was institutionalized as the Bantustans, underdeveloped, no water. You know, I can go on and on. It's abandoned, but it's still home. And I'm very interested in terms of what then happens to the psyche and the well-being of the home who's neither here nor there. Thank you.
Why don't I take these questions?
Yeah.
And then if we have time, we'll do another round? Okay. Thank you, all three, for really fantastic questions. I'll start with the last one and work my way forward, if that's all right with you. Organized abandonment includes all aspects of life. And in fact, I first conceptualized it thinking about people's homes and their communities. That's where it all comes from. So I'm very glad that you bring it up so that I can make explicit for our conversation tonight that it includes people's homes. And I will add that the assumption that I make, because I know better than to make it, the assumption that I make because I know better than not to make it, is that many, many people on this planet live and actually make homes in many places, sometimes 2 or 3 at once. And so I've written about this, and I'd be happy to share with you. And there's a little bit about that in this book. Actually, there's quite a bit in this book. So those places, and the people, which is to say the people who make those places home, work, migration paths, and so forth, are part of what organized abandonment refers to, and also highlights quite vividly how thinking the idea that, quote, freedom is a place does not mean freedom is a small space somewhere very local. So I've written a lot about people who are long distance migrants for whom the entire migration path is a place. It's real. It's where people live. So I'm not telling you anything, but anybody in the room who thinks I'm not thinking about this, I wish to assure you, absolutely, this is a crucial part of what thinking abolition geography is about. And of course, people who are constantly on the move are, as you said, vulnerable to premature death at very high rates. Also vulnerable to other forms of organized violence, whether that violence comes in the form of police, of border patrol, of gangsters looking to make their power and so forth. So these are all essential. And what I've learned talking with communities and working with communities over now many decades is both how people make home and, how do I want to put this? Let me interrupt myself for a moment. I become very disturbed when people who mean well characterize, for example, especially Black people, through the eyes of the oppressor, as though that's all we are. I believe in double consciousness. Du Bois I believe that we can have, and we do have, and we must have, at once, an objective and subjective sense of self, and everybody has it. There is no one, and this is like my one quarrel with how people use Fanon. There is no one whose existence is in the zone of non-existence. That's just like characterizing what the oppressor sees, but it's not how we are. It's difficult. I'm not being glib here to say that every single human is creatively and aggressively trying to make their way in the world. And where politics comes in is to join that energy together, but not to presume that people are not historical subjects of history, making their own way. This is the most important thing, I think. So going to gender, and I could talk all night about this, but moving to gender, the contemporary abolition movement, as many of you might know, sort of kicked off, we didn't invent anything, but we sort of got it going again about 25 years ago. And the people who were gathered together to make this movement move were mostly women and gender nonconforming people. There were a few guys. There were 28 of us, I think, 27. And we arose and consolidated our energy from many different struggles, none of which we left behind. So we had people who had come up through the Communist Party, through other communist formations, people whose work was really focused on questions of reproductive labor and reproductive rights and social reproduction. There was the old womanist movement. There were feminists, radical, not liberal, feminists. There were people who were young people fighting for the rights of youth to realize a future that was not grim. And so when I said earlier that in some concluding remark that reproduction and social reproduction are what abolition is the sort of political vision for, that is to like lift up exactly the point you made, my comrade, that there isn't emancipation if we are not all free. There isn't emancipation if we defer some freedom in exchange for other freedom, which doesn't mean that we don't try to free people as we can, right? We work very hard to get people out of prisons. And everywhere that inequality is deepest, United States, United Kingdom, South Africa, prison is the most prevalent. But all of these are part of abolition political vision. We don't have a blueprint, but we have models. We learn them from learning with one another. So the abolition model has grown because I've gotten to know over the last several years Abishali, and I've gotten to know MST, and I've gotten to know people around the world, which deepens the vision and deepens the possibilities for internationalism, which doesn't let capitalism off the hook. The digital. I think, comrade, and if you disagree, please say, and anybody, if you disagree, please say, I think that your suggestion that the kind of abstraction, the kind of removal from the everyday real that financialization compels us to think about bears some kind of relation to digital worlds and the ways that we can connect across time and space without ever being able to touch each other, without being in the same room. And also, if I'm understanding you correctly, that we can project via social media personalities and preferences and politics that are not necessarily tested in the real, right? They're not necessarily tested in the real. So I suppose the only thing I have to say, which I think you already know, and which is why you asked the question, is that we can use these tools to connect with people we otherwise can't, just as print allows us to talk to people we will never meet. That's what this does. It lets me talk to somebody I'll never meet. So we can use these tools to talk to people we otherwise might not meet, but then test our politics in the various real terms available to us. Even while we understand that at least, this is something Prof. Victoria and I were talking about earlier, that when there is a digital platform that people are communicating through and sharing ideas and debating and so forth, that too is a place. It is a place. It's not geometrically contiguous the way this room is, one geometry, but that doesn't make it not a place, right? So it's a place like, a fair, a celebration that might set up, booths and tables on a weekend and celebrate some great thing, and people will come and eat and buy and dance and enjoy themselves, and then it's gone on Monday. That too is a place. So that's how we can think about geography. It's the world we make. Geography means write the world. And through our actions, it's not write about the world. It's through our actions we write the world, we make it, we create it, and we recreate it.
More hands. Oh, that kind of hand too, yes. Question hands.
Here's the hand.
Hi. Sorry. Honored to be in your presence, Professor, and thank you for coming to talk. Just a question in terms of kind of more along the lines of geography, and like you mentioned, with reference to Vladimir Lenin and the financialization and imperialism and how the financial sector is quite important to that. I think I worry a lot about how within the global south, a lot of kind of the infrastructure and the way that, everything is kind of formulated around the extraction of said financial capital. And these are very much kind of extractive spaces, and, along the value chains or the different tricky ways in which value is extracted and how up at the value chain, it's appropriate. But how within the abolitionist movement, and I mean there was, how within the abolitionist movement is it conceptualized that, because I think a lot of this reality here is that extraction. How is it us on the other side of that linkage? Or what exactly is the action? What is the path forward in terms of breaking said linkage? What exactly is the kind of way in which I suppose the revolution has to start everywhere at the same time, almost. But what does that look like? I wonder if there's, if you have any thought to that about us on this side. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your sharings today. I think I am deeply moved and changed by a lot of what you've been sharing. And I'm not sure of the relevance of my question, but I'll ask it anyway. And I think it's a curiosity around your practices at arriving at these truths about our current circumstances and experiences. I think I'll speak for myself. I think it's easy to read and come into contact with this information, but I would appreciate learning a bit more about how you alchemize these truths and let them live and breathe through you. Thank you.
Wow. Is that it? Okay, I think okay, here's another question. Right, smack in the middle.
I want to also just say thank you to Comrade Ruthie. The question that I have is to do with movement building in a context where the social movements are weak, I think. I think the question of Palestine, I think many people, there's been many, I feel, discussions around why there isn't a mass-based kind of character to the protests for Palestine. And also, I think, further than that, how movements, important movements, social movements like Abolition are and have over the years been deteriorating, have not been growing. So there is less of a social energy, maybe we can say, to hold our government accountable. And I think my question is, I think from a young activist, kind of learning from an elder in those periods where the work that you are doing is important, but it is difficult. In many ways, it's dispersed in terms of the fact that the movements are not as strong as they used to be. How do we rebuild? I think it's a question that has really sat deeply in the organization that I'm part of, Kanya College, in terms of building a new cadre that is willing to struggle for that future of abolition. And how difficult it is with survival struggles, with the kind of, I think we've spoken about how counter-hegemonies of capitalism have also influenced people. So I think I made it a bit clearer in terms of what is to be done in the words of the people you quote.
Okay, let me take on these three amazing and challenging questions. I'll start with Comrade who asked about extraction, and point out that Comrade, where you ended your question is exactly where we began. The revolution is everywhere. And so there are all kinds of struggles going on now about who should control extraction. I mean, the whole, fight, bitter fight in, for example, Bolivia is about extraction, particularly lithium, which if you have a phone, you have lithium in your phone. If you have a phone, you have a bit of Congo in your pocket. Like, we're all connected to extraction. So one of the ways that people have approached the question of extraction wherever it might happen, but as you said, rightly, it's more in the global south than elsewhere, but not exclusively, is by asserting counter-imperial territorial rights, right? Asserting those, and those are difficult to assert if you don't have the organized violence power to back it up, but people are doing it. They're doing it with various external forces that come through to extract whatever, copper, cobalt, you name it, whether they're conflict minerals or other things, or to extract more simple things like agricultural products. Tanzania, for example, is a country that has quite a vibrant cotton agricultural economy. And Tanzania, as I understand it, I'm not expert in this, but I've learned this from one of my graduate students, entered into agreements with one of their principal buyers of the raw cotton, which is to say several firms in the People's Republic of China, to demand that the people of Tanzania add value to the raw cotton before it's shipped out, which changes the economic calculus, right? It changes the economic calculus. So that's an example, it's not the example. One of the ways that people have in shorthand described this struggle, and this kind of echoes with Comrade Lenin's writings of a century ago, more than a century ago, has been to those who are proponents and those who are opponents call what's the struggle is resource nationalism, right? So some of us can say for sure that what is happening in the ongoing struggle in Congo is in part fueled by resource nationalism, who will control. Elsewhere, there are questions about land redistribution, which also comes under resource nationalism. I'm not proposing now, to go back to a question Prof. Victoria asked earlier, I'm not proposing that some 20th century notion of nationalism is the solution to our problems, but thinking territorially about what is possible lets us think for shorthand nationalism to then think, well, then how can people fight? So I want to say one other thing about extraction, and then I'll move on to the other questions. As many of you are aware, the contemporary abolition movement sort of gathered its energy and focus through an understanding that the massification of criminalization and punishment in the form of imprisonment was growing and growing and growing, and the people who were whose lives were interrupted by this are the people who all of our movements have been working with in all those other ways I described earlier, right? That whatever we were doing in our movements, we'd wake up one morning and people would say, yeah, but what about prison? Yeah, but what about the police? Yeah, but what about this? And as the scope of what we came to call mass incarceration which I'm not crazy about anymore, but for a while it was useful. The scope of criminalization is just sweeping the planet, using crime as the excuse for interrupting people's lives over and over and over again without protecting those who are vulnerable to harm from harm. That we also try to understand what these institutions, we call them prisons, consisted of, how they worked, how they operated, where the money came from, where it goes. And many people in the United States, because the United States is particularly, and I'm not saying wrongly, but sometimes incorrectly, obsessed with slavery. Many people presumed that there were so many, for example, Black people in prison in order to exploit their labor as was exploited under slavery. But that doesn't actually explain it. All those Black people in prison, plus all those white people in prison, plus all those brown people in prison, plus all those red people in prison, plus all those yellow people in prison. That the slavery explanation didn't hold, even though unfreedom definitely focused us. And what some of us came to realize is that the people in prison are there not to work, although some do, but rather they're having been taken out of their lives and put into cages, allows their time to be extracted and turned into money. It's extractivism. But what's extracted is time, not lithium or cobalt or copper or water or cotton, but time. And as the time is extracted, then the prison guard is paid, and the vendor who sells food to the prison is paid, and the architect who designed the prison is paid, and the utility company that provides the electricity or water or gas, if there is any such thing, to the prison is paid. It's because of the inaction of the human in there, who does not stop being a protagonist of his own life, or her own life, or their own life, but their inaction allows the extraction of time, which people then turn into money. So it's financialization as well. Okay, so moving along to my comrade's question about how did I love that word alchemize and knowledge. It's something, learning to think and talk with all of us together is something I'm constantly doing. It never ends. I'm never done. But it's come together thanks to the creative aggression and generosity of people with whom I have been in struggle. And this goes to the answer to the third question. With whom I have been in struggle over the years. I know everybody knows I'm a prof. That's true. I've been a prof for about 1/3 of my life, which means there's 2/3 of my life where I did other things. I was a car mechanic. I was a model for artists. I did many things, many things. And what's the most important is that in all of the things that we do, that we learn to listen really well and to test what we know in a way that is creatively aggressive, not destructively aggressive. That is to say that when we debate, We debate in a way to build knowledge, not to knock the other one down. When we read, I read, and I compel my students to read, to figure out from what they read, how they can do something they otherwise couldn't do. I don't teach them to read to say what's missing and what's wrong. It's fine if they notice that. Totally fine. I'm not saying pretend everything's perfect, but I am saying somebody put all this work into a book or a text or a film or a poem or a dance or the songs that we heard at the beginning. What does that enable us to do? And we should do it by combining our energy and doing it together. I'll tell one story and then I'll go to the last question about organizing. This is a question I told in Durban the other day, and I think only a couple of you heard it. 3 of you. I have a friend who is from Guinea-Bissau. He and I were born about 6 weeks apart in 1950. He was born in a village in the northern part of Guinea-Bissau. I was born where I told you, in New Haven, Connecticut. He was born into a small country in which the Portuguese imperialists did not bother to teach anybody anything because the purpose of the Portuguese imperialists holding that country was to use it as a way station for other imperial projects. Quite by the chance of more than 500 years of Franciscan Catholic brothers wandering the African continent, propagating their faith. These are Italian Franciscan brothers. They wandered into this village in Guinea-Bissau and set up a school and taught a small handful of boys how to read and write Portuguese. And Guinea-Bissau is a country like South Africa where people speak many, 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 many languages. When Sana, who was one of these boys, who the Franciscans called Raul, when he was 13, he learned that there was a revolution going on. It was 1963. The PAIGC had started the revolution in 1961. He ran away from home and just ran and ran until he found a cadre who was part of the revolution and said, "Here I am. I'm young, I'm strong. Give me a gun, teach me how to shoot. I want to join the revolution." And the cadre said, because their revolutionary idea was not just shooting guns, they said, "What else can you do?" And he admitted he knew how to read and write. And they said, "You're not shooting anybody. You're going to work for the medics. When people come wounded or people come on furlough, you're going to teach them how to read." At the time, there was one person out of 200 in Guinea-Bissau who knew how to read. 1 in 200. So that's what he did from 13 until 17 or 18. And then, because he worked with the medics the whole time he was not teaching people to read, he went to the cadre when he came of age and said, "Okay, I should go to medical school now, yeah?" And they said, "No, you are not going to medical school. You are such a good storyteller. We need stories. We need somebody who's going to tell stories about us becoming the people we are becoming through our revolution, the people we intend to become, not to document the revolution, but to tell stories about our subjectivity, our hope, our intention." So they sent him to film school in Havana, Cuba, from a revolution where he spent 3 years with three of his comrades, met film cadres from Vietnam, from all over the world who were involved in revolutionary struggle. This was 1969, 70, 71. And then they went back to the revolution that was still going on. It lasted for 14 years and began making films. Today, he is still a filmmaker. This is what he does. He alchemizes a sense of being emancipated, of being in the world. And while he's disappointed in how many people failed the revolution that Cabral and the PAIGC put into motion, he hasn't lost hope. He continues to make films and work with people and build education programs for young people to become filmmakers and so forth. So that's part of it. Which goes to the last question, and I know we're over time, so I will be brief. Start everywhere. What I've learned is best expressed by a phrase from Stuart Hall. He says, people organize around things that bite into their existence. And that biting can have all different causes, but it's something you feel and doesn't let you go, and you have to do something about it. I have to do something about it. Or most importantly, we have to do something about it. So I have organized with people in trade unions who are trying to democratize their union at the same time that they realize that abolition is important for them, even though they're nurses or prison teachers, actually, not guards, but teachers. Organized with faith communities who see the possibilities for people to prepare for the next world by being more actively involved in solving the harm and the pain and the precariousness of this world. And so many other examples. So I take seriously what you say, comrade, about the that social movements are not these days growing as they should, but also I believe, from what I hear here in South Africa and elsewhere, that the possibility for growth is not only with us, but given the rise of fascism everywhere, it is necessary for us. It is fascism that will bite into all of our existences. So we have to fight for land occupation and housing. We have to fight for all of these things. I know you already know we have to fight, but maybe these words will give you a little bit of extra energy at a time when it feels like energy is so dissipated from us. So thank you all.